Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for this week's Come Follow Me lesson with the Mormon News Report podcast. My name is Jenny Noonan Dye. I am joining you this morning from Provo, Utah, along with my husband, John Dye. He is the one who's responsible for everything that you're seeing on your screen, for those of you who are partaking via the live video. As always, for those who are participating with us here in real time, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you? Where are you watching from? What stood out to you in your study this week? Whether it's the first or the 50th time you've read these verses, and P.S., I think it's at least the 50th time for some of these verses for a lot of you. Or even if you didn't read them at all, we get to as many comments as we can, just as we would if we were gathered together all in person. We like to try to use the space and time as a supplement to your other Come Follow Me studies, to sometimes take a deeper dive into at least one aspect of the lesson that stands out. We love having your participation and your feedback. I'd like to excuse my co-host for the Mormon News Report podcast, Brant Malone in Detroit. He's got stuff going on. It's fine. It's all fine. We'll talk about that another time. And welcome we talked about taking a deep dive. Are you our diving coach, Ben? Ben Bernard's in California. Are you our diving coach?
Hey, good morning, everybody. Like snorkel buddy?
Sure.
Maybe
Sure.
That works.
You bet. You bet. How are you today?
We are hanging in there, and my kids are doing early morning seminary again, and it's back to school season, and there's wildfires, and it's smoky, and we're still in the middle of a pandemic. But you know what? It's a Sunday, and we're here with good people, and hopefully we can have a little bit of gospel light to kick this day off and this week off in a slightly better, happier tone. So glad to be here.
Good. Well, we're grateful that you're here with us. It is back to school time for some places, some other places not. But today is Sunday, not October. I wish it was October. August 22nd. And the lesson for this week is called A Principle with Promise. And it covers Doctrine and Covenants, sections 89 through 92. Now, last week's lesson, where we just talked about Doctrine and Covenants, section 88, we talked about how some sections have nicknames. We call it this or we call it that. And that is certainly the case for DNC 89. Is it not?
89. I mean, it's a simple little thing. This is like this is the hallmark section. If you were to look at on the outside world of what the Latter-day Saints are known for, what the members of the Church of Jesus Christ are known for, this would be in the top 3 of your Family Feud flipboard answers of what people know. It's the word of wisdom. So what could we possibly say about the word of wisdom that would be helpful for adults or for new converts or for 21st century? I mean, this is not a new thing exclusive to us, right? We're surely not the only ones who have done this. Other people have had ideas about alcohol and whether or not it's good for us.
Sure. Health codes are a thing, and dietary restrictions are a thing and I'm sure you'll probably get into this. I mean, it's not unique to us to have a health code when it comes to what we eat, what we don't eat, what we drink, what we don't drink, what we do with our time and our bodies and all that.
Whether that's faith-based, I mean, plenty of other religions they say, we're not doing this because God said so.
Right.
Or it could be a civic group that says, we're not doing this because look at the negative effects it has on society. Look at all these alcoholics or, drug people all over the place, right? Here's all these different problems.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tricky. Or what if it's just you by yourself setting up your own health code because you're trying to figure out the best way to live in this one single mortal tabernacle that we have. I was talking about this with my wife the other night. I say, what would it be like if we had no word of wisdom, if God gave us absolutely nothing about this and simply said, go figure it out on your own. And at the end of your life, I want you to come back and tell me how you did, but I'm expecting you to set up your own rules. Wow, how would that turn out? And then what do you do if I set one set of rules for me and somebody else has a totally different one? I mean, it's a tricky one. It can be a challenging section for some.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot because, I mean, we talk about this a lot, just when it comes to maybe not even judgment, but also stewardship of, kind of why someone does or why people do things differently than we do. I mean, I know in my personal life, and to be honest with you, my number one reason my whole life for not drinking has been that alcoholism runs in my family, and that has nothing to do with any sort of grouping or faith subscription. It's just it's something that almost like a warning, like don't even go there. And
you see firsthand the effects of what can happen. And I mean, that right there, I know for some people that have dealt with that can land harder than any proclamation from Mount Sinai ever could.
Sure. And the reality too is that there's the reason why I bring that up is just because there seems to be a social pressure, right? When you mention the Family Feud flipboard of, what are Latter-day Saints known for? Most certainly, no coffee or don't drink.
Hey, that's a good answer.
Right. That's number one. So with that, there can be a social pressure involved, but it's just, I guess, kind of my friendly reminder that we don't need to concern ourselves with such things.
Yeah. I think the word of wisdom can be a fascinating tool that can be used for very constructive, healthy purposes in our own lives. And when abused and used as a destructive, separative tool, we can sometimes wield it as a judgment stick, a bat that we whack other people with in our own faith and outside of our faith to say, no. And, I don't know if that's what God intended for it, all of it. So I'd like to start off with a couple of stories, not magical stories about how the word of wisdom has made everything wonderful for me, but some different stories, because I think there is a place, and you'll probably hear other podcasts and other Sunday school teachers that will share stories about how the word of wisdom has said, hey, this is totally awesome has been awesome for you, right? Like this kid didn't drink coffee and went on to win the track and field championship, or this person said no to that marijuana joint and got the job, or whatever. And there are places like that. However, I think there is probably a more mature and helpful and sometimes challenging way of looking at these things. And that's kind of what we do in this class, right? We say, okay, cool. There are good primary answers. There's good Sunday school and seminary level answers. Those are a great place to start. It's not a great place to finish, though, because our lives are sometimes a little bit more complicated than that. I want to share some not magical stories, some incidents that happened in my life. The first one was the Postum Incident. So, some things that I had to wrestle with. Grew up in Utah County. I'm the second of 9 kids. I'm coming home with my folks. Both of my parents worked full-time out of the house while I was growing up. Just absolutely exhausted, just, working their fingers to the bone. And we were coming home one night, and we had picked up some late night groceries after I helped them close their shop where they worked. And I noticed as we were sitting in the car, and all the other little kids, I was probably 9 or 10 years old, and I noticed that in this bag of groceries was a jar of something that said coffee flavored beverage. And I'm looking at the top and it says Postum. And when I tell you that my world was rocked, because my good God-fearing Latter-day Saint parents bought a coffee flavored beverage, and they're bringing it home into our house, and that's against the word of wisdom. And what am I doing? And I sat there fuming, the sense of betrayal of, how could you? What is this? You're giving into temptation. And no joke, in my self-righteous anger, I had this plan of how at the next red light, I was going to roll down the window and grab that jar of Postum and heave it out and watch it shatter and turn and say, I'm doing this because I love you. I don't want you to go to hell for drinking coffee flavored beverage. And they try to talk me down for it and help me understand why it was not actually a sin. And that was hard for me to wrestle with.
Well, I'm curious what they said to you, because I mean, thank goodness for our kids who tell us, I mean, like,
Oh,
because you're talking about yourself and, like your just rage. And, now that you're a parent, I'm sure you can see the other side. It's like when your 10-year-old is like, don't forget your seatbelt when you haven't even left the driveway. And it's like, thank goodness you're here.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Yeah. What do you remember what they said?
They said, Ben, it's not coffee. It's barley. Look at the ingredients. Yeah, but it says coffee flavored. That's just as bad. It has the word coffee on the lid. Ergo, it's evil. No, it says, read the ingredients. Look at this. This is not coffee. When it said something, avoid the very appearance of evil. If I'm not going to do the bad thing, neither should I do the bad adjacent things. And that was a level of nuance that my 8-bit brain could not comprehend. They're working with 32-bit graphics over here, and I'm, they're looking at millions of colors in grayscale, and I'm dealing with black and white. And it did not compute. And all they could say was, trust me, it's okay. And it took me a long time to come to grips with that. So that's the first incident. The second one, about a year later, one of my grandfathers was coming to visit. My parents are both children of divorced parents who had remarried. So I had like 8 sets of grandparents growing up. Many of them were not LDS. And when one of my non-LDS grandfathers came to visit, he was always such a cool, friendly guy. I loved it. He was one of my favorite grandpas. They came from California, and I lived in Utah, and I knew that anybody that came from California was rich because, man, he brought treats and gifts every time that he came to visit. And we were getting ready to host them, and I was so excited because Grandma and Grandpa were coming. And I came home one day, and there was a 6-pack of Coors Light beer in the fridge. And again, shocked and aghast because my parents, at first it was the Postum, now it's the beer, and what's going on? And my dad says, Ben, your grandpa Adam likes to sit down and unwind with a can of beer. I don't drink it. Your mom doesn't drink it. Our family doesn't drink it. But this is the one time he comes to be a guest in our home. And if me offering this to him could be a sign of hospitality that makes him feel welcome and safe and kind here. And I've asked him, don't drink it in front of the kids. Clean up your cans when you're done. And he was a chill, nice, happy drunk. And he didn't get like drunk. He would just have a single beer. And again, no, Dad, you can't do that. This is against the word of wisdom. It's not supposed to come into our house. You have offended the spirit. The spirit has left because you brought that silver bullet has killed it. And he was like, okay, Pat.
Thank goodness for you. Thank goodness for Ben.
I tell you, man, if it was not for this Postum, yes, there it is. My parents, they would have gone to HECK in a handbasket. So, third incident, sitting in a Sunday school class.
How old?
Same, 8 years old.
Okay.
What is it with being in the 80s in Utah County? Man, I was like, okay, sitting in a Sunday school class in the middle of wintertime, and the lesson for that week was Word of Wisdom. And we read the text of the Word of Wisdom. Something, hot drinks are forbidden. Teacher looks at us and says,
oh no.
Now, kids.
Oh no.
You realize that hot chocolate is hot, right? And we're like, yeah. What? And he says, if God really wanted you to drink hot chocolate, would he have forbidden it in the Word of Wisdom? I mean, the scriptures say it's hot, right? And with the marshmallows, and he's like, "Oh, you have to let it cool down, or else it's a sin."
Very good, nice save. It's warm cocoa. It's not hot chocolate.
Warm cocoa is fine. And so we had this time where I legit thought that's the way it was. And it was like, oh my goodness. Okay, so between those three things, sometimes simple illustrations that sometimes we get the Word of Wisdom wrong. Sometimes we understand the interpretation, the application of it, all these sorts of things totally differently. So what are we to make of it? This 21st century version, like if I were to go teach my kids the Word, do I just give them a checklist? I say, here's what it is, and here's what it isn't. And then how are they supposed to reconcile what's in the text versus what's been updated? And What about stuff that isn't even in the text? And how are they supposed to make sense of that? And what does that have to do with the health issues that are not even mentioned in the word of wisdom and not even mentioned in the clarifications? It can be a challenging thing that we possibly could not solve in the one single hour, but we'll try, because that's what we do, right? So let's start off. Oh, do we want to get to any of these comments? Looks like we've got some wonderful people chiming in and saying hello.
Yes, I want to welcome. Marcelo is joining us from the Philippines. Hello. And Precious is joining us. Hello. Thank you. Mills says, good morning. Yes, for the same reason alcoholism and drug addiction runs in my family. I've seen the destruction it brought to my family. I vowed as a little girl never to have any addictive substance. Judy is joining us. She says, I'm here from Ephraim, Utah. Thank goodness I found you again. I love this. Tiana says, I love Postum, drinking it right now. And then Carol asks, my mom does too, LOL, but where do you get it?
Oh, shoot.
I would say probably in the beverage aisle of your local grocer, not sponsored. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. You'll probably find it out there.
Yeah.
Welcome, everybody. We're so glad that you're here. So let's talk just a little bit briefly about kind of the history and the context. Let's frame up kind of word of wisdom, general stuff. And then I'd like to share just some general thoughts on how perhaps we can engage with it in a more holistic and complete way. All right. So the story behind the word of wisdom is very well known. It's very well documented. And we'll actually share a cool little video here at the end. John, if you'd like to go to the next one, please. Basically, the general idea was in the early 1800s, the early days of the church in Kirtland, as the men would gather together, they would do what men who gathered together at the time did, which was be served coffee by the women, pull out pipes and chewing tobacco, and spit big, nasty brown loogies on the floor, and sometimes in the spittoon, and have pipe smoke. And they'd probably have beer, and they would probably be drinking wine. This part of this, for context, was a very normal, common thing. Number one, because they didn't always have clean sources of water, right? They didn't have water filters. They didn't have a bottle of Dasani. They didn't have a Brita pitcher nearby. Water that you could pull out of a well would have to be filtered. And if they don't have refrigeration, that stuff's going to go stagnant and nasty really quick. And people have known for millennia that if you add fermented something with water, it would not only kill the bacteria, but then you could leave it in a jar or a bottle or a bag or something, and it would stay. So if you were thirsty and you needed something to drink, something that had any type of alcohol in it was the way to go. And that it wasn't good, it wasn't bad. That's just the way it was. Now, in the middle of all of this, it's the wonderful story of Emma and probably some of the other sisters at the School of the Prophets cleaning up after the brethren. And I can just, see them over there kind of grumbling, and just, I can almost hear in my mind Emma just being like, boy, it sure would be convenient if there was a revelation right about now that said I didn't have to deal with any of this kind of stuff. And then Joseph reportedly goes into a different room and comes back and he says, hey, guess what? It looks like this is not a good thing for us to do. And Brigham and everybody else, they threw their stuff away. That's great. So that's pretty much all we need to really talk about for the history. But, I thought an interesting thing about this. I thought it was wonderful that one of our hallmark revelations and kind of hallmark doctrines of our church came about because there was a woman who had no priesthood authority, no official calling in the church, raised attention to an issue. And we don't know how exactly she said it or what she said. I could throw out any type of verb here. Did she pester him? Did she badger him? Did she bother him? Was it just a suggestion? Did she ask him? Was she counseled? One way or the other, she brought focus to this issue. And because of that, that started a tipping of the dominoes that leads us down here today. So God bless her and her courage to speak up and say something. And the counterpart to that is that the man in charge listened to her. He considered it. He accepted the suggestion. He then went off and counseled with the Lord. And all we know is that at the end of that, a revelation came out. And in my mind, the way that I fill in the blanks of that story, I can almost see God up there saying, are you going to ask? Because I've got an answer for you. Just ask. You want to know, is this bad? Oh, I'm so glad that you finally asked. Yes. And if I have to spell it out to you that this is not healthy for you, well then, brother, let me spell it out. This ain't good for your body. The tobacco, use that for your cows. All these strong drinks, all these sorts of things, these are not good. Now, another couple things to remember is that this entire temperance health code did not spring out of the darkness completely ex nihilo, right? This did not come out of nowhere. Not only was there alcohol very commonly served at all meals of the time, but there were other temperance movements that had started springing up on the East Coast to deal with the rampant explosion of alcoholism. So there were other groups in Kirtland that were dealing with this. There were other groups in Pennsylvania and New York that were saying, we really need to reevaluate where this came from. So I think it is a beautiful part of our revelatory experience that God does not expect us to be sitting in darkness and then all of a sudden share light completely unbidden. But he can leave us in a world that has challenges and problems all around us. And we can see other people trying to solve those challenges. And somebody can finally look at us and say, you know, I think there's a different way that we could deal with this because look what all these other people are doing. And then Joseph or the leader, whomever was in charge, goes and finally seeks confirmation. And God would be like, yeah, it's about time you asked. Funny thing, here's what you should do about it. So brief history on the background. Jen, any thoughts or comments or things that stand out to you there?
No, I'm grateful that you mentioned that part of Emma's role in it. I mean, I know that we in what is it, DNC 25, that is about the hymns. You know, it is always nice to recognize when her role has yeah.
So let's talk briefly about the enforcement and how things have kind of changed over time. This is one of the parts of our history that we need to be forthright about and completely transparent about. The reality is the level of enforcement of the word of wisdom and how it has been interpreted and how people have to obey it has changed over time. It has changed depending on the needs of the church, depending on how the leaders are handling it. It has depended on the context in which they have lived and on how people have responded to it. And if we have a living, growing church that is a fluid ship in motion, then that's kind of to be expected. I found a fascinating document years ago, and I've got just not the original OC document, but it's a copy of it. John, if you go ahead and pull up the next one, please. I was looking over church history stuff for the pioneers, and I found this really simple set of records of, here's like a packing list of what the pioneers that came across the plains in the 1840s had. So it's called the Bill of Particulars. You can see here on the screen, this is cited. This was originally printed in a document called the Nauvoo Neighbor, which was a newspaper printed in the city of Nauvoo, not owned by the LDS Church, but certainly read and cited by them. This is cited in B.H. Roberts, who is a member of the church, Comprehensive History of the Church. So a copy of like, hey, for people that are going on the OG trek across the plains, this is what you got to bring. So here's your packing list, right? And it would have things like bring the cows, bring the beef cows, bring the sheep, bring mustard. And here's the thing. In this original packing list for saints coming across the plains, they were instructed to bring 1 bricks of tea, 5 bricks of coffee, and at least 1 gallon of alcohol. So, ladies and gentlemen, your pioneer ancestors, if you had them, they made it across the Saints, #not sponsored, by drinking the things that everybody who was trying to get across the plains were doing to help them wake up in the morning and make sure that people were alert when they were, whipping the cows and people didn't fall out. So this is part of our history. And because of that, our understanding of it has changed over time. I think that if we are really going to lean into and fully embrace the idea of continuing revelation in all its nuances, it means that we have to be flexible enough to accept when things change, right? We may not like the reason for the change. We may not like the way that it's presented. Sometimes the communication about the change or the admonition or the urging or the invitation, sometimes it doesn't always get handled the best way, if there is a best way. And sometimes not everybody believes the changes that are happening. But again, if we are going to be those Latter-day Saints, we're going to strive to be people that believe all things, hope to be able to endure all things, or if we believe all that God has revealed, that he will yet reveal many great and important things for the kingdom of God, then we have to frame our faith as something that is dynamic rather than static, right? So it's something that's going to be change and fluid. And while that can feel disconcerting because we want a faith foundation that is built upon rocks, not sand, part of that rock is feeling comfortable with the idea that the shape and the placement of those rocks can change. And our building is still strong because it's still aligned to Jesus Christ, but we need to learn how to fold that into our paradigm of what prophets and leaders are for. Jen, any thoughts on that? What do you think?
Well, we do have a comment here. Judy asks, was this document after the word of wisdom was given too? And the answer is yes, because that document is dated 1845. The word of wisdom revelation was 1833. So there we see that, as you mentioned, Ben, being flexible and open, and as we, you also mentioned before, the tendencies we may have to use these sort of things as judging sticks, which is inappropriate, that we give each other grace and understand that, think of something that you do daily. And we've talked about this kind of speculating, hypothetical situation before, but if there were to be a revelation all of a sudden that, okay, you have to change what you're doing in this way, starting now, how easy would that be for you to do? So it does take a while.
So to talk about, or to address Judy's question, or perhaps a question behind the question. So yes, there were people that were drinking coffee and tea and alcohol coming across the plains who were active, faithful Latter-day Saints. They had been endowed in the temple. At the time, the word of wisdom was not being enforced as a temple mandate back then to the same degree that it was now. And in fact, for the first several decades of the church, it was more of a guideline than a rule. It was a
principle with promise, if you will.
Principle with a promise.
Yeah.
And if you don't follow it, it did not revoke your membership in the kingdom, and it did not affect your status of being able to get into the temple, and it did not preclude you from receiving any blessings. It was kind of, hey, if you guys want to do this, this could be really good for you, but if not, well, then you do you. So
I don't think it was added into the Temple Recommend interview until I think I read 1920. I don't know about the date, but I think it was the early 1900s.
Yeah, under Heber J. Grant in the early 1900s. Later on, once the saints have settled, and this is just coming out of World War I, new generations of members are growing up, and they're dealing with politics. And there was a sort of what we would call a retrenchment, a refocusing of doctrine and rules under one of the particular leaders in the early 1900s. And one of the results of that was they said, all right, this is now a rule instead of a guideline. So yeah, things change. Also, we will have, we'll send links in the Facebook post and show notes afterward for source references. So you can go find all of these things, anybody that's listening ourselves.
And also, if I can really quickly, this is completely out of the blue, and I didn't even say anything to you about this, but tonight, Sam Brown.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Did you see this tweet? Let me pull it up really quickly because this is really exciting. That Sam Brown, who is an historian, his wife is Kate. Why did I just lose her name?
Holbrook?
Oh, yes. Come on, where is it?
Holbrook?
Yes, Kate Holbrook. Yes, sorry. And it's they're doing a virtual fireside tonight. It is called Church History and the World. It's the Word of Wisdom. So we will put a link to that RSVP in the notes as well for anyone, because I think it kind of dives deeper into the stuff that you are so wonderfully touching on here.
Yeah, and for dear listeners and participants, Kate Holbrook is one of the principal authors and historians responsible for the Saints history book, the official 21st century book of history. She's the one. Like if you remember the fireside they had in Nauvoo where she's there, I think it was like Elder Cook or President
It was
Nelson.
Elder Cook. Yep.
Yeah. I
Yep.
mean, these are the primary historians. And so, yeah, wonderful fireside tonight, getting more into the history of how the word of wisdom came about.
Yeah. She's the managing historian for women's history in the church. So anyway,
so
just a little aside, but we'll put that link in there.
So that's totally good. So everybody knows what the word of wisdom is, right? We could go through and make the checklist and say coffee, tea, tobacco, alcohol, blah, 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 blah. I found a simple and I think sometimes ignored article about, or a way of looking at it, of what the word of wisdom isn't. Let's take a couple minutes and talk about this, because these are good things to remember, lest our culture grow larger than the doctrine. We'll finish up with that here at the end. John, if you wouldn't mind pulling up this next. And this article came from the Ensign. It was also in the LDS library. President Boyd K. Packer, president of the Quorum of the 12, taught us what the word of wisdom is not. Here are at least three things. Number one, right off the bat, the word of wisdom is not a guarantee that you will always be healthy. And as he said, quote, the word of wisdom does not promise you perfect health, but it teaches how to keep the body you were born with in the best condition and your mind alert to delicate scripture or spiritual promptings. So, man, I don't know about you, Jen, but I thought this was a wonderful truth to be reminded of, because I have heard a number of cases of people that have expressed shock and outrage and dismay about some health challenge happening in their life. And it's usually framed with, or it contains an exclamation of ... But I did everything right. I followed the word of wisdom. I didn't drink the alcohol. I didn't drink coffee. I didn't smoke. And still I got lung cancer? I thought I was supposed to be safe. Doesn't it say something about the destroying angel passing? How could that possibly happen to me? And it's this sense of almost betrayal. Like I did everything I was supposed to.
Sure. No, that's real. And sorry, did you ask me a question that I lost in there?
Oh, yeah. No, it's okay. So first thing, it's not a guarantee that you will always be healthy. Number two, it is not a comprehensive list. As Elder Packer goes on, quote, there are many habit-forming, addictive things that one can drink or chew or inhale or inject, which injure both the body and the spirit, which are not mentioned in the Revelation. Okay, well, here's the $1 million question. If it's not mentioned in the Revelation, is it still part of the commandment?
Well, what does it say? What does it say in the scripture?
That's a good point. What if the scripture don't even say anything about it? This is part of the challenge. And number three, that he says what the word of wisdom is not. It is not an excuse to be obsessive. Quote, learn to use moderation and common sense in matters of health and nutrition, and particularly in medication. Avoid being extreme or fanatical or becoming a faddist, somebody who follows every trend. Now, this is a really good point, and I'd like to, cross-reference this to D&C 58, 26 through 29. I'll just go ahead and read those real well, and then I'm curious how you think all this fits together, Jen and John, and of course everybody else that's here in the class. For behold, it is not meet that I should command in all things, for he that is compelled in all things, the same as a slothful and not a wise servant, wherefore he receives no reward. Verily I say, men and women should be anxiously engaged in a good cause, and do many things of their own free will, and bring to pass much righteousness. For the power is in them, wherein they are agents unto themselves. And inasmuch as men do good, they shall in no wise lose their reward. But he that doeth not anything until he is commanded, and receiveth the commandment with a doubtful heart, I don't know. I mean, yeah, he's my prophet, but he's not my doctor. And he keeps it with slothfulness, the same is damned. Okay, so what do you think? What are we supposed to make of all of this?
I mean, part of what we've been blessed with, things that we've been blessed with, a mind, knowledge, agency, learning, the influence of the Spirit, science, Personal revelation, general revelation, all sorts of things that, again, do not require us to be commanded in all things. And I love that. I think that's great because, gosh, the idea of having to be commanded in all things, just thinking about that brings me a great deal of anxiety.
Like, we have a hard enough time trying to love my neighbor as myself. Sometimes I have a hard enough time trying to love myself. And if all of a sudden, if I had a list, and there are some faith traditions, bless their hearts, who actually do have commandments in just about all things.
Sure.
What they wear, what they eat, what they do. And for them, if that brings them closer to God, then literally, God bless them. That is wonderful. That is awesome. If that's what they need, then I wish them the best. I would really struggle with that for me personally.
Isn't it interesting how in so many aspects we want, or we think we want, to be commanded in those things, and in others, like I said, it can bring anxiety, but it also, it can bring discomfort, right? The idea of having to be still and ask for ourselves to get that personal testimony and what that might mean. I mean, it's almost like before, when you were talking about Emma and her involvement in this revelation, the word of wisdom, that it's almost like, are you sure you want to know what? I'm not saying that Joseph said that, but it's almost like, understand what you're asking for if you're willing to receive the answer, because coffee and tea was, like you mentioned, when men got together at that time, they would often drink alcohol. When women got together, they would have coffee and tea.
Tea society, yep.
So it's the same. So Lucy shares a comment here. She says, I think another important part of the word of wisdom, eating of fruits and herbs or vegetables, will give you great treasures of knowledge. And Holly makes a great point here. The scripture says word of wisdom is not a commandment, which surprises me, as we treat it like one. And like you mentioned before, Ben, it was a revelation given as principle with a promise in 1833. And it wasn't until almost 100 years later that it was included. Did you say Heber J. Grant included it as a temple recommend question?
Yeah. And it's changed, it's sometimes it kind of feels like the way that we watch modern revelation continue to change and unfold. It's not always a clean or painless or comfortable process, right? That it's like, no matter what you do, there's some things are not going to sit well with me because I'm human. And so for sometimes it can be challenging to look at the text of the original scripture and look at how it's interpreted and applied today and see a discrepancy there. And I am not going to try to make excuses for anyone or simply say, just get over it and just have more faith. I think that is a challenge that deserves to be voiced and accepted and embraced and loved. And everybody can find their own way to resolve that. There are some things that the word of wisdom does promise. He said, it's not a guarantee of health, So let's take a look real quick, John, if you wouldn't mind, on the next slide of some things that it does promise. Now, anybody out there, if you go on to lds.org or if you go to your Gospel Library app and you look for the topic of word of wisdom, you will find all of this content. This is all there. These are screen caps, like literally right out of that. Living the word of wisdom is a huge blessing. Here are some of the ways that For Strength Youth mentions you could be blessed. Freedom from harmful addictions, more control over your life, a healthier body, a more alert mind, guidance from the Holy Ghost, greater ability to serve the Lord. And I love this quote. I believe this one's from Russell M. Nelson. This one: never let Satan or others deceive you into thinking that breaking the word of wisdom will make you happier or more popular or more attractive. And of all the different ways that it could bless us, I think that first one that they put right up there at the top is a huge one. Freedom from addiction. Now, part of the spirit of the law of the word of wisdom, I submit, is avoid the things that you could get addicted to. So one of the challenges that we have is we have to figure out what's the letter of the law, like the bare minimum, and then what's the spirit of the law. The bare minimum, that should be universal for all members of the church, right? That's the temple recommend questions. That's the coffee, tea, tobacco, alcohol, drugs one. That's the bare minimum. The spirit of the law, everything above that, that one's up for interpretation for all of us. And therein lies the rub, because it can feel weird if my interpretation is different than Jenny's, and Jenny's is different than John's, and John's is different than Lucy's or Judy's or anybody else that's here in the class, because I think this taps into our caveman brain and into the original desire that we have evolved over millions of years of wanting to be part of the crowd, wanting to be safe, and wanting to feel accepted. And if I'm trying to live my gospel truths in one way and I say, well, small amounts of red meat is okay, and other people say, no, the word of wisdom says something totally different, and another person says, no, the word of wisdom totally different, then all of a sudden in my mind, it's like, okay, wait a minute, we can't both be right here. One of us has to be wrong. Is it you or is it me? And how does that work? And then it can feel uncomfortable. And in scenarios like that, I can see why we would say, oh gosh, could you fix this? Like, answer this question for me. What's allowed and what's not? Just tell me what it is, right? Just spell it out. So that way there's no contention and we can all feel safe and accepted. It's kind of a challenge.
Yeah, Ben, that's interesting. That's an interesting thought. As we look through this, being prescriptive, it's similar to the Constitution. If you look at original intent or strict interpretation, they're trying to look through the eyes of the framers of the Constitution. I mean, the thing is, the Constitution, if it doesn't grow and morph and evolve, it's not as relevant today as it was when it was created. Same with the word of wisdom. Again, it is a principle with promise, as Jenny mentioned. The other thing, though, that I wanted to mention was, addiction. Why is it bad? Let's delve into that. I think it's because it keeps you from being able to, basically communicate with the Holy Ghost, right? It puts you in subjugation. It makes you a slave. And so anything that does that, for example, I eat ice cream after 8 o'clock. Guess what? I don't feel good. I cannot feel the Spirit because I don't feel physically well, right? After that. So do I do it anyway? Sometimes. Jenny can tell us that.
No comment.
But I think it is a principle, right? It's an underlying principle. These are not prescriptive in any way. There are some things that we're asked not to do, but it's like, how can you feel the Spirit? That's what our Heavenly Father wants. How can you use your body as a vessel to feel the Spirit, feel His presence? I really believe that that's the backbone of the word of wisdom.
Absolutely. When we think back, if everybody remembers clear back to the premortal life that we all, clearly remember, what was the entire battle for? What was the one key thing that we were trying to get? What was the whole purpose of coming here? It was this physical body, right? And it was the ability to control it. It was agency.
Yeah.
That was the whole point. So God's saying, look, you really want to go down there? Okay, cool. You're going to go down there. And what is Satan going to try to do? He's going to try to attack anything on that body that would take away your agency. And just like a phone could be hijacked or a computer could be taken over by a virus that could shut off the Wi-Fi. If anybody has seen in the news what they call ransomware attacks, where a virus can get in and lock your entire hard drive until you pay, Bitcoin or whatever. It's possible, just like somebody could take over a device, it is possible for chemicals to get into your body that rob you of your agency. This is what addiction is. I have heard heartbreaking stories of men who held the priesthood that were so addicted to prescription painkillers and opiates that on one day they would be passing the sacrament in their white shirts and ties, and then immediately afterward they would leave the building to go fix that addiction because they could not function without it. I have seen people in my own lives who were, there were borderline just on the edge of having mental health breakdowns, but they didn't know it because it was invisible, because it's in their brain. We couldn't see it. And somebody said, hey, well, just try one marijuana joint, right? Come on, just one wouldn't hurt. Just relax. Turns out there are compounds in the THC that have a high probability of triggering, for some people with just the right DNA, triggering a cascade of mental health problems that are now with them the rest of their life. And what once was a path has now all of a sudden skewed off into a totally different direction. And agency is gone. If you were to, zoom out of the word of wisdom and look at what's the point, is it really about the alcohol? Is it really about the coffee? No. Just like the original Mosaic law, was it really about not eating pork? No. And just like in Peter's day, when all of a sudden the Lord flip-flopped on the whole law of Moses and says, hey, everything that was forbidden, guess what? Congratulations, you can now eat it. And he wrestled with that. And he's like, what do you mean this is that which is unholy is now holy? Sometimes there are things in our life where God says, this was forbidden, now it's okay. Or this was okay, and now it's forbidden. And it can be challenging for us. But the whole entire point is, what can we have that will magnify our ability to enjoy this physical body and to enjoy it lusciously with the full complement of agency? So some things that we need to remember about the word of wisdom. Number one, it is contextual, meaning the context of how we interpret it and apply it is going to change. Yes, from year to year. Yes, from region to region. Case in point, I served my mission in the Fiji Islands. The Fijians and a lot of other people in the South Pacific drink a drink made out of a root that only grows in the area called kava. Kava is a narcotic. It is part of their tradition, like turkey and apple pie is for Americans. But it was determined by Brethren of the 12 in conjunction with local leaders that it needed to be added to the word of wisdom for the local members. So me, as a little missionary, had my flip charts, and I was instructed to take a Sharpie, and it says, your word of wisdom says no coffee, tea, alcohol, tobacco. And we had to write on the bottom of it, kava. And it was part of the word of wisdom and baptism requirements that they had to obey by. The second thing is, it's adaptable, meaning we can look at how we interpret everything above and beyond the baseline to our own personal needs. We have seen some people that say, I really think the word of wisdom means one thing for this type of group of people, and it's going to change over time. It's going to be adapted. The scriptures even said, to the weakest of the saints. It's like, here's the lowest common denominator. Like, this is the baseline. And this third one is, I think, is a very key point. The word of wisdom, consider it as a starting line, not a finish line. This should not be something that we treat of where we say, oh, God did all the thinking for me. The only thing I need to worry about is whatever's in the word of wisdom. And if it's not spelled out in the word of wisdom, then it's free game. We're kind of missing the point, right? That's not what it's there for. The idea is, God says, here are the things that you should start with. And then, like Jenny, like you said, use your brain, use science, listen to your body, be mindful and intentional about what you are consuming, and ask yourself, does it really even make me healthy? Does it increase my agency? Does it make me feel good? And if it doesn't make me genuinely feel good, then why would I ever consume it? Case in point, I saw a silly tweet years ago that I've replicated with my own kids. The difference between childhood and adolescence and adulthood. Childhood is when you say, I want to eat chocolate cake. And the parents say, you can have a small piece. And then the child throws a fit because they want the whole thing, but all they get is that tiny little thing. Adolescence is when you rebel against all of that. You say, well, how come I can't eat the whole entire chocolate cake? I want to eat the whole entire chocolate cake. You can't stop me. And the adult says, nope, it's not a good idea. Don't do it. I'm not going to let you. And in adulthood is when you decide you're going to eat the entire chocolate cake because nobody can tell you that you shouldn't. And then you realize why the adults told you you should not eat the entire chocolate cake. And then you're faced with the reality that, yeah, I could sit down and eat half a gallon of Ben & Jerry's at 1 a.m. and nobody would stop me. And the terror of realizing nobody would stop me.
Yep.
And it's now 100% on me. Some of us may go decades without ever having a wake-up moment of listening to our body and trying to figure out the signals that it's giving us. It was years ago when all of a sudden I was eating probably like a bowl of cereal, like, Captain Crunch, something simple. And I realized that for years, anytime I had something really, really sugary, it would give me a headache. And it was like this stupid moment where I looked at myself in the mirror and said, why would I voluntarily choose to give myself a headache when I eat this thing? And I vocalized it to my wife. And now anytime, there are times when I'm emotional, well, I need my comfort. And daddy starts reaching for the Rice Krispies to drench with honey. And she looks at me and she's like, oh, really? You're eating that today? All right, good luck. Here's some Advil you're going to take with it.
Yeah.
Because I have to know that, yes, I want to listen to my body. And sometimes, yeah, we're going to have that ice cream after 8 o'clock at night. But the idea is that if we have this body that we're supposed to live, we need to listen to it. And the more we listen to it, the more we can be in tune with that spirit, the better off we're going to be. Jenny, your thoughts?
I mean, absolutely. And it really is about the spirit of the thing, because, like John said, for his own thing, he said he can't have ice cream after 8. It isn't about that it's 8 o'clock. It's about
10:59, you're fine. But when a clock ticks over, spirit's gone.
Right. It's about, what did you do before you ate the ice cream? What are you going to do after you eat the ice cream? How much of it are you going to eat? And what is the result? But you're right, Ben. You can do it if you want to. And there will be consequences with all those things. How much you eat or how little you eat. After you eat it, do you go on a walk or do you lie down? Is it 2 hours before bed or is it 10 minutes before bed? That sort of thing.
Absolutely. The final thing we'll point out here to remember, some good things to remember about the word of wisdom, it's interpretive. And here's what I mean by that. If you've ever seen what we would call an ink blot test or a Rorschach test, the idea in psychology where you can see a vague, undefined image and interpret it based on what's happening inside your brain. Mm-hmm. In other words, you will see inside it what you are looking for. I think with the word of wisdom, you will see in it what you are looking for.
Sure.
If you want to be vegan and you read the word of wisdom, you will likely find support that will back up your position of being vegan. If you want to be 100% carnivore, you will find in the word of wisdom scripture text something that supports it. Same could be said for keto or paleo. Same could be said for drinking alcohol. Same could be said for drinking coffee, being low carb, no matter what. If you bring your perspectives to it and proof text your way through the scriptures and say, let me find my way to support my particular position, you're going to find it. And I think this is one of the ways that we sometimes use the word of wisdom wrong, is that we have our own preconceived ideas. We bring those with us as baggage, so to speak, to the scriptures and ask the scriptures to support us. We will leave out some things and focus on the others, and therefore find the proof that our position is the right one, which we then turn and wield on the people next to us and say, my position is the right one. I suspect that when God said, you know what, the first commandment you guys need to figure out is to love me, and the second one is to love your neighbor like yourself. And herein lies that great challenge of the word of wisdom, is I will then get to determine my own personal health code. For me, maybe it's low carb. For other people, it's low dairy. For other people, I was chatting just this week with a guy on Reddit who lives in northern Alaska. They don't get much fresh veggies and legumes and grains in northern Alaska. They have meat and blubber, and that is what is in their fridge 360 days of the year. And that is what they have to survive. And when he looks at this, he's like, is this against the word of wisdom? And some people jumped on and said, yes, it is. And he's like, whoa. I'm in a totally different context. Mm-hmm. And so now we bring us to the final story, which is the culture of the church versus the doctrine. And I want to share with you the parable of the lemons and the coconuts. We had a lemon tree in our backyard that started all of a sudden growing these huge, oversized lemons. We thought they were good and healthy on the outside because surely the large size would indicate lots of juicy fruit on the inside with plenty of juice and vitamins. And when we cut through it, it revealed a thick rind and bitter fruit and very little juice. And it turns out that the tree's DNA had become corrupted with its original graft. It was deficient in nutrients, if we're listening with our spiritual ears. The wrong branches weren't pruned off soon enough, and the bad fruit started to grow, and it overtook everything. And now the fruit that it came out on the outside, we focused on this big thing, saying, oh, this is the fruit. Once we dissected it and looked closer, the thing we were looking for was completely different and actually lacking. Same thing happened when I learned about coconuts. I remember seeing a fresh young coconut tree for the first time, thinking, oh, these gigantic coconuts would be full of tons and tons of yummy sweet milk and cream. And they would be huge and easy to get to. And once you cut it open, you realize that a good 80% of it was this thick husk that was really difficult to get through. And then there was this tough shell with very, very little fruit on the inside. So I think that this is a good model for us of how we distinguish between the doctrine of the church and the rules of the church and the culture of Latter-day Saintism or Mormonism or members of the churchism. They all have their place, and they are all a natural outgrowth of each other. What we are trying to get to is the doctrine of Christ. That is at the core. That's the middle. It's actually very simple. It can be summed up in very few tweets. And around that doctrine of Christ, we establish certain rules and certain programs as commandments. And then, like layer upon layer growing on the outside of a pearl, the natural tendency is for a culture to expand and protect the rules. The ancient Hebrews called this the hedge around the law. Sometimes today we say, avoid the very appearance of evil. So let's stay away from things that are adjacent to that which should be forbidden. So this is me and my little 9-year-old self-righteous Postum is bad because it has the word coffee on it. There are some people today that say anything that is even kind of close to possibly breaking the word of wisdom should be treated with the same severity as breaking the word of wisdom. So whether they're right or wrong, we simply need to recognize that that is part of the culture and not the doctrine. Now, sometimes we would make mistakes when the culture gets too big and too thick and too heavy, or when that rind is too big and too thick, we mistakenly think, oh, well, this huge gigantic lemon or this big old coconut, it's healthy. It's obviously very fruitful. It's supposed to be like this because anything else that doesn't look like this has got to be wrong. And it doesn't need any help to get better. But the reality is it's more show off than nourishment. And the original plant won't survive. And in fact, in the case of this lemon tree, it was actually signaling that it was in distress and it needed pruning and it needed, in this case, phosphorus adjustments in order for the rind to get smaller and the fruit to get bigger. So what's the lesson? What is the takeaway? What does this have to do with us in the word of wisdom? Maybe a super heavy culture focused on the external things should not be mistaken as a sign of healthy spirituality on the inside. As we go through and deal with these challenges, let us remember this quote by Boyd K. Packer. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, John. Jenny, would you mind reading this for us?
Happy to. Principles are not spelled out in detail. That leaves you free to find your way with an enduring truth, a principle as your anchor. Members write in asking if this thing or that is against the word of wisdom. It's well known that tea, coffee, liquor, and tobacco are against it. It has not been spelled out in more detail. Rather, we teach the principle together with the promised blessings. There are many habit-forming addictive things that one can drink or chew or inhale or inject, which injure both body and spirit, which are not mentioned in the revelation. Honor the principle of the word of wisdom, and you will receive the promised blessings.
Excellent. So this is from the Ensign, May 1996, from an article that he read. Final thoughts in closing up. You know, if God were to show up today and asked whether we took good care of his temple, and we said, oh yeah, I took good care of the temple. I took care of the building and we made sure that it was properly vacuumed and everything on the inside was fine. And he says, no. I'm talking about your temple, the one that my spirit goes into, your body. I loaned it to you for a few years. I gave you the brain to use, and I've sent you signals inside that body to let you know when you're doing things right or wrong. I gave you the dopamine. I gave you, the headaches, both ends of the spectrum. I wonder if we would think differently about what a temple recommend means, or what the temple as a vessel of God means, when we realize that we are to be held accountable for taking care of this. I fully believe that one of the ways that we experience the divine in this life is through our own body. What we see, what we hear, what we feel, what we taste can be a way of drawing closer to God. And as a reminder, when you go to church today, see how many of those senses God will use to try to talk to you. After all, in one of his final blessed meetings with his disciples, what did Jesus do as a sacramental ordinance? He fed them. He gave them bread. I believe that one of God's love languages is making food for his friends. How many times did he feed people? Did he really feed them? So for us, we know the baseline. We then have the opportunity to add to it in our own way as we see fit. We know the stuff that we have to stay away from. And it means that everybody's journey is going to be different. A person who wants to run is going to be different from a person who wants to lift weights, from a person who can't do any of that or chooses to do something totally different. All that we need to do is do what you can, where you are, with what you have. And if you think that you should do something a little bit healthier, if you want to find a way to increase your agency, then find that one small thing, whether it's eating cleaner, moving more, resting more, whatever. Anything that increases your agency, increases your freedom to choose, and your freedom to experience life in its fullest will bring you closer to God.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ben. That was wonderful. Excuse me. We appreciate everyone being here today with the comments that you've left, and even those who didn't leave any comments at all. We're glad that you're here. Thank you for being here. Next week, we will continue our Come Follow Me study. That will be Sunday, August 29th. The title of that study is Receive of His Fullness, and it covers Doctrine and Covenants, section 93. Thanks again to John Dye for managing everything on the screen here. Thank you to Ben for your preparation, your lesson. Thanks again to everyone for your comments. And we're going to end, I think, with a video. So Thanks so much, everyone, and we will see you again next week.
Cheers, everybody.
Of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints live by a health code called the Word of Wisdom. What is the Word of Wisdom, and why do millions of Latter-day Saints around the world follow it? Let's take a closer look. The prophet Joseph Smith received the Word of Wisdom by revelation in 1833. He wrote the revelation down and canonized it in a collection of revelations called the Doctrine and Covenants, which Latter-day Saints view as Scripture. The revelation is recognized by most as the reason why Latter-day Saints abstain from alcohol, tobacco, coffee, tea, and drug use. But to understand why the Word of Wisdom came about, we first need to know some historical context. The Word of Wisdom appeared at a time of intense public debate in the United States about alcohol abuse. As early as the 1810s, rapidly growing industrialization and alcohol use had begun breaking down previously held social norms. By the 1830s, many adults in the United States had been raised in families where alcoholic beverages were consumed at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Many people became concerned about the social and health consequences of increased alcohol consumption. The temperance movement grew as reformers called for abstinence from hard liquor. Many involved with the movement went further, taking a pledge against all alcoholic beverages, including beer. Some even recommended coffee as a substitute for alcohol, given that clean water was not always available. At the same time, some reformers spoke out against tobacco use. It was in this social climate in the early 1830s that Joseph Smith started a series of formal classes called the School of the Prophets. This school was an assembly of church leaders who met to discuss and instruct one another in theological and secular learning, such as religion, economics, philosophy, and civic matters. But the attendees frequently smoked, chewed, and spat tobacco, all in the same space where Joseph taught the school and recorded revelations. In addition, Emma Smith, Joseph's wife, was left to clean up the mess, and she was disturbed by the men's actions. She spoke to Joseph about it. Joseph inquired of the Lord and received the revelation known as the Word of Wisdom. The revelation helped the saints navigate many of the issues debated by reformers, and it also addressed Emma's specific concerns. For example, the Lord warned against the consumption of strong drinks, which Latter-day Saints understand to mean alcohol. Also, the Lord cautioned that hot drinks, understood as coffee and tea, were not for the belly, in other words, not to be consumed. Neither was tobacco, which was better used as an herb for sick cattle. Also at the time, some groups, like the Shakers, advised against eating meat, while other groups advocated no restrictions at all. However, in the Word of Wisdom, the Lord revealed that He ordained meat, both beast and fowl, for the use of man on condition that it be eaten sparingly. The Word of Wisdom, given in its early American context, did not specifically mention many substances that have since become common. As the world's industries began mass production of such substances, church leaders encouraged Latter-day Saints to use common sense and stay away from harmful, habit-forming substances. For example, recreational drugs should be avoided, while the authorized and correct use of prescription drugs is okay. In the Word of Wisdom, the Lord also warns against conspiring men with evil designs, foreshadowing a surge of substance abuse, addiction, and death. But Latter-day Saints see the Word of Wisdom as more than just a health code. Adherence to the Word of Wisdom not only teaches members how to control appetites and guard their health, it is also part of what makes them eligible for temple worship and promises spiritual benefits. Most importantly, following the Word of Wisdom helps engender greater receptivity to personal revelation through the Spirit of the Lord. As Boyd K. Packer, an apostle of the Lord in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, once said, "A fundamental purpose of the Word of Wisdom has to do with revelation. If someone under the influence can hardly listen to plain talk, how can they respond to spiritual promptings that touch their most delicate feelings? As valuable as the Word of Wisdom is as a law of health, it may be much more valuable to you spiritually than it is physically." So let's review. What is the Word of Wisdom, and why is it important to Latter-day Saints? The Word of Wisdom is a revelation. In it, the Lord promises that those who follow His guidelines will have better health. But He also promises greater happiness, wisdom, and spiritual blessings too. Most of all, the Word of Wisdom shows us that God loves us. He wants us to be healthy and spiritually receptive to His words. Now you know.